Elizabeth expressed her disappointment with a playful chuckle. "Oh, my dear daughter-in-law, it appears that we have forgotten our wallet and cards at home." Her eyes were twinkling with anticipation. The table burst into hilarity as her husband Lucius joined in, and their joy reverberated throughout the opulent restaurant where the family had convened for a magnificent dinner. The in-laws' cackling grew louder as the bill, which was a staggering $200,000, arrived, as if the absurdity of the situation were a private jest. However, their jocularity abruptly came to an end when Adelina, who was seated at the table in a serene manner, spoke with a silent resolve that penetrated the commotion like a blade. Adelina had married Donany not only out of love, but also with the fragile, fluttering hope of establishing the type of family she had aspired to as a child, one that was characterized by mutual support, unity, and affection. Her childhood was characterized by a patchwork of discord, as her parents were perpetually embroiled in arguments, their voices piercing with resentment. They had never been able to offer her the affection and security that she desired. Donany, with his gentle demeanor and evident incapacity to navigate the complexities of life, appeared to Adelina to be a gentle soul in need of guidance. She perceived in him a certain innocence, an infantile quality that aroused her protective instincts. Adelina had become accustomed to accepting responsibility from a young age, and she embraced this role with a calm determination, confident that she could cultivate him into the companion she had always envisioned. The initial stages of their marriage appeared to be encouraging. Donany was attentive, and his affection was sincere, albeit slightly immature. He frequently sought his mother's guidance on a variety of topics, including inconsequential domestic decisions and career decisions. Initially, Adelina regarded this as a manifestation of his profound familial connections, a characteristic that she found endearing. She clung to the belief that he would develop into a more self-sufficient individual as time progressed. She reassured herself that his dependence on his mother, Elizabeth, was a transient occurrence, a phase that would dissipate as their marriage progressed. However, actuality shortly presented a different perspective. It was excruciatingly evident that Adelina's financial stability was significantly greater than Donany's. He was a mid-level manager at a modest firm earning a respectable salary that could have sufficed for a simpler life. However, he spent a significant portion of it on his passions, including fishing trips that necessitated expensive gear, hunting excursions that necessitated costly equipment, and the most recent high-end gadgets that briefly shone before being replaced. By contrast, Adelina was the financial director of a prominent corporation, which was a prestigious position. Her household security was guaranteed by her meticulous money management and substantial income. She had always taken great pride in her capacity to prudently plan, save, and invest, a skill that she had refined over the course of years of self-reliance. Elizabeth and Lucius, Donany's parents, established a custom of coordinating extravagant family gatherings from the moment they married. Initially, these were intimate gatherings that were characterized by shared stories and hilarity. However, the festivities became more ostentatious as time progressed. Birthdays were elevated to magnificent spectacles, anniversaries were elevated to extravagant celebrations, and even minor milestones were worthy of gatherings that rivaled high society galas. The guest lists were comprised of relatives and acquaintances, some of whom were distant and scarcely known. The tables bowed under the weight of exquisite dishes, and the venues, always upscale restaurants or banquet halls, reflected a taste for luxury that Adelina soon realized she was expected to underwrite. Elizabeth possessed a unique ability to convey subtle yet impactful messages. With a warm smile that never reached her eyes, she would say, "Oh, Adelina, you are so brilliant with budgets. Donany is unable to resolve these matters. However, you are an exceptionally intelligent woman." Her words were tinged with flattery, but their purpose was evident. Adelina was to bear the expense. Donany did not provide any resistance. He nodded in accord with his mother's recommendations, his reticence indicating a tacit acceptance that this was the way things were. "Adelina, you generate a greater income," he would say with a sigh. "It's no problem for you," impervious to the significance of his words. To him, it was a practical arrangement, not an unjust burden that was imposed on his wife. Initially, Adelina consented without objection. She aspired to be the model wife and daughter-in-law who seamlessly incorporated into her new family. She longed for their approbation, a sense of belonging that she had never experienced during her childhood. Elizabeth received a designer purse, while Lucius received an elegant watch. She purchased extravagant gifts for her in-laws. She orchestrated elaborate celebrations, guaranteeing that each element was executed with precision. Despite the fact that the sums of the restaurant bills reached the tens of thousands, she paid them without hesitation. To her, these were sacrifices that were worth making in order to maintain family harmony, a modest price to pay for the love and acceptance she so urgently desired. However, the expenses escalated, both emotionally and financially. The family's demands became increasingly insatiable. Custom furniture for Elizabeth and Lucius's residence, state-of-the-art appliances, and even a complete apartment renovation were all financed by Adelina's earnings. Additionally, they embarked on overseas vacations to opulent resorts. As she observed her savings diminish, she postponed her personal ambitions. She ceased purchasing new clothing, forewent her own vacations, and reduced her enjoyment of minor indulgences, such as dining out with friends, in order to meet the family's increasing expectations. However, no matter how much she contributed, it was never sufficient. Elizabeth's requests became more assertive, concealed behind a facade of concern for Donnelly or their prospective descendants. "You would not wish for Donnelly to experience embarrassment, would you?" she would say. "Alternatively, it is for the family, Adelina. You comprehend." A slow-burning resentment began to take hold in Adelina. She devoted her days to high-pressure meetings and intricate financial strategies, working rigorous hours, only to witness her earnings being diverted to support a lifestyle she did not opt for. She began to experience a sense of alienation in her own life, as her identity was reduced to that of a provider, a role she had never voluntarily assumed. The weight of responsibility that Adelina had carried even as a girl, her father's absence, and her mother's fatigued visage after long shifts, memories of her childhood surfaced unbidden. She had resolved to establish a distinct existence, one that was characterized by mutual respect and affection. Rather, she was ensnared in a cycle of obligation, her sacrifices and efforts going unnoticed. Elizabeth approached her with yet another request, which was the final straw. She lamented, "My back is simply unbearable," her voice dripping with practiced anguish. "I am advised by my physicians that I require a wellness retreat, a suitable one, that is, for my health. However, Lucius and I are unable to afford it on our pensions. Are you aware of this?" Adelina silently surrendered her credit card to cover the expense, feeling a sudden surge of rage. She was unraveling internally despite the mechanical nature of the act. This was no longer solely about financial gain. It was about her right to an existence of her own, about equity, and about dignity. She was unable to continue to deny the reality. She was being exploited, and her silence was facilitating it. Her grandmother's words reverberated in her consciousness, unyielding and sharp. "My dear, do not allow anyone to ride on your back, or you will spend the rest of your life carrying their burdens." Her grandmother was a woman of unwavering independence, her wisdom having been honed through adversity. Adelina regretted not listening sooner. However, as Elizabeth's anniversary approached, she was aware that the time for change had arrived. She was unable to continue to exist as a passive observer in her own narrative. She resolved to reclaim her autonomy and put an end to the financial exploitation, even if it meant jeopardizing the fragile family bonds she had worked so diligently to preserve. Adelina painstakingly devised her subsequent actions. The anniversary celebration, a lavish event that Elizabeth had organized, would serve as the backdrop for her assertion. She was aware that her actions would elicit outrage and potentially cause the family to disintegrate. However, she was adequately equipped. She devoted days to the collection of evidence, including every bank statement, receipt, and invoice that served as proof of her contributions to Donnelly's family. She organized them into a folder, which served as a tangible testament to her selflessness. She did not intend to exact revenge. She desired clarity for both herself and them. On the anniversary day, Adelina arrived at the restaurant with a tranquil demeanor that belied the turmoil she had been suppressing for an extended period. The venue was a vision of elegance, with crystal chandeliers projecting a warm light over tables adorned with fresh flowers and flickering candles. The air was permeated with the aroma of opulent desserts, exquisite wines, and roasted meats. The gentle melodies of a string quartet were interspersed with the merriment of the guests as they moved about. The head of the table was occupied by Elizabeth, who was resplendent in a tailored dress. Her smile was effervescent as she accepted compliments and gifts. Lucius, who was always the silent counterpart, sat beside her, his expression one of understated contentment. Donany, who was seated next to Adelina, appeared apprehensive, his eyes darting to her as if he were detecting the tension she was carrying. Her visage was a mask of decorum, as Adelina sat poised. She was consumed by a tumult of emotions, including a quiet sorrow for the family she had worked so diligently to establish, determination, dread, and fury. The celebration unfolded before her, as if through a glass wall, and she felt as though she were an outsider, observing the guests' smiles, the clinking of glasses, and the effusive toasts. It all seemed false. She could no longer endure the performance. For an excessive amount of time, she had assumed the role of the ideal wife, and the burden was suffocating her. As the evening progressed, the guests elevated their glasses to express their sincere hopes for the long and joyful life of Elizabeth and Lucius. Elizabeth reveled in the attention, her speeches replete with self-congratulation, as she recounted her family's appreciation for her sacrifices and the love they bestowed upon her. Lucius quietly assent, content to allow her to radiate. Donany also stood to offer a tribute, his words brimming with appreciation for his parents' unwavering support and devotion. Adelina's heart was laden with bitter irony as she listened. To her, Donany's words were hollow, reflecting a world in which her contributions were imperceptible and her role was diminished to that of a mute benefactor. The guests were relishing every mouthful as waiters gliding between tables with platters of exquisite food, and the meal reached its apex. Elizabeth, who was perpetually the performer, entertained the audience with anecdotes regarding her travels, purchases, and relationships with influential figures. Adelina's mind was preoccupied with the anticipated moment, as she sat in stillness, her food remaining unfinished. When the bill was finally presented, the waiter discreetly placed it in front of Elizabeth. She peered at it with studied nonchalance and, as anticipated, turned to Adelina with a cloying smile. "Oh, Adelina, you will ensure that this is resolved, won't you?" The words, which were both familiar and entitled, lingered in the air like a challenge. A hush descended upon the chamber. All eyes were directed toward Adelina. The family's financial burden was seamlessly absorbed by her, and the guests waited, acclimated to her silent compliance. However, this time she refrained from retrieving her purse. Rather, she met Elizabeth's gaze with a steady, unwavering expression, no contrition, no fear, only a fatigued resolve. Slowly she reached for the box that contained the gift envelopes that the guests had brought. She opened it and commenced tallying the currency within, her voice remaining composed and deliberate. She stated emphatically that the sum of $230,000 should suffice to satisfy the obligation. She then produced a thick folder from her bag with a measured grace, a dossier that she had meticulously compiled. "And this," she said, holding it up, "is a small token of appreciation for your anniversary." She opened the folder, which revealed a scrupulously organized collection of documents. Bank statements, invoices, and receipts, each one a testament to the financial burden she had endured. She perused the pages, stating, "This is the sum of all the money I have spent on your family in the past year. Every luxury you have experienced, including groceries, utility expenses, car repairs, gifts, vacations, and entertainment, was covered by my funds." The room was enveloped in a state of dazed silence. The weight of her words set in, and guests stared, some wide-eyed, others clearly uncomfortable. Elizabeth's face was reddening, and her expression was a combination of humiliation and wrath. Donany remained seated, his jaw agape, as if the spectacle before him were incomprehensible. Lucius's eyes were averted, and his hands were firmly grasped in his lap. Adelina's voice remained unyielding. She stated that the sum is nearly 1 million rubles in a firm, even tone. I have spent 1,000,000 rubles, which I have earned through my hard labor, on your pleasures without a single consideration for the cost to me. Not only in terms of financial gain, but also in terms of time, aspirations, and personal satisfaction. She paused, her gaze scanning the room. I have completed my work for the day. I will no longer be responsible for financially supporting your indulgences. Your financial dependence upon me is becoming increasingly tedious. I aspire to live my life to the fullest, to pursue my own happiness and spend my money on myself. Elizabeth's features were fixed as she sat rigidly. Lucius appeared to be smaller than ever, and an aura of unease emanated from him. It appeared as though the floor had been lifted from beneath Donini's boots. Nevertheless, Adelina maintained her composure. Without touching her entree, she rose. With a breathless immobility, the room observed her truth, which hung in the air like fog. Donini abruptly rose from his seat, nearly toppling over his wineglass. Adelina, what are you currently engaged in? His voice was thick with astonishment as he rasped, what is the reason for presenting this information to the public? She addressed him with a composed yet determined tone. Donini, this is a matter that affects all individuals. Additionally, I am unable to maintain my silence. She observed the bewilderment in his eyes, the infantile bewilderment of a man who had never been compelled to confront reality. Elizabeth's voice was strident with fury as she stood next. How daring are you? She raised an eyebrow. My anniversary has been destroyed by you. In front of our visitors, they humiliated us. Adelina's fatigue was more profound than her wrath as she exhaled. I did not arrive with the intention of causing anyone to feel embarrassed. I arrived to inform you of the truth, which you have neglected for an excessive amount of time. Elizabeth snorted. What is your truth? You are merely envious of our joy. You harbor animosity toward Donini. You are attempting to cause him to turn against us. Adelina stated with conviction. I do not harbor any animosity toward Donini. Rather, I desire for him to be his own person. However, you have prevented him from developing, keeping him bound and confined in your grasp. Elizabeth's visage was twisted with wrath as she raised her hand to strike, but Donini caught her wrist. He murmured, Mom, please stop, his voice quivering. I implore you to cease. Elizabeth wrenched her hand free and redirected her attention toward him. She spat, You were never weak. She produced you in this manner. Adelina's voice was unyielding but fatigued as she shook her head. Elizabeth, it is not I, it is you. You have exercised dominion over every aspect of his existence. You have never afforded him the opportunity to mature. Lucius eventually spoke, his voice gentle yet resolute. He stated, his eyes averted, Perhaps Adelina is correct. It is possible that we should engage in introspection. Elizabeth, too, duped him. She snarled, You have consistently lacked courage. Are you now aligning yourself with her? Adelina harbored sympathy for Lucius, who had never ventured to confront his domineering wife, as he fell mute. She gazed at Donini, who was seated with his head lowered, and the tension in his body was evident. His moment had arrived, and she was aware that he was at risk of drowning. Adelina stated, I am no longer willing to finance the pleasures of others. Her voice was now more subdued, but it was still resonant with determination. Her gaze was now avoided by the visitors, who had been filled with joy just moments ago. The air was dense with unease, and the truth was too strident to ignore. Donini was rendered speechless as he was deprived of his customary refuge behind his mother. He gazed upon Adelina as if he were witnessing her for the first time, not as a provider or a devoted wife, but as a woman who had reclaimed her identity. She gave him one final glance, a fleeting glimpse of the hope she had once harbored for him, which had now been extinguished. She spoke gently, I am departing. There are no additional explanations or farewells. Everything had already been stated. The frigid night air welcomed her like a rebirth as she turned and walked toward the exit. The sound of Elizabeth's enraged shouting receded behind her. She did not retrace her steps. Adelina proceeded forward through the city's flurry of lights and activity, advancing toward a life that was no longer governed by guilt or obligation, but one that was finally hers. Upon returning to her apartment, a modest, tranquil space that she had acquired with her own funds prior to marrying Donini, she entered and closed the door behind her, allowing the silence to embrace her like a soothing balm. The air inside was cold and still, unaffected by the pandemonium she had just left behind. She stood in the foyer for a brief period, her shoes still on, as if she were allowing her mind to adjust to the enormity of her actions. Then she walked slowly into the living room, her heels clicking gently against the hardwood floor with each step, a soothing affirmation of liberation. The apartment was small but warmly illuminated, and it was adorned with her fingerprints in every corner, books arranged by theme and color on the shelves, a few succulents by the windowsill, paintings she had acquired from local artists, and a large armchair where she would curl up with a blanket and a cup of tea at the end of long days. Elizabeth, Lucius, and Donany were absent from her sanctuary, her alone. She sat down slowly, dropped her purse on the arm of the settee, and exhaled profoundly for the first time in what felt like years. The actuality of her emancipation began to settle into her bones, and the tension in her shoulders began to release inch by inch. She was no longer accountable for the pleasure of anyone other than herself. Her attention was drawn to the framed photograph of her and Donany at the commencement of their marriage, which depicted them beaming and brimming with potential. She gazed at it for an extended period of time before proceeding to remove it from the frame and reinstalling the empty frame. She slept dreamlessly that night, snuggled under a blanket in her beloved cotton pajamas, her body finally able to rest without the burden of pleasing others. On the following morning, Adelina was awoken to a golden silence that enveloped the room as sunlight penetrated the draperies. For the first time in years, she experienced no sense of urgency to please, and there was no schedule of obligations that needed to be fulfilled. She leisurely brewed her coffee, indulging in the aroma, and then opened the balcony door to allow the morning air to enter. She made 2 critical calls while sipping, one to her attorney, instructing them to initiate divorce proceedings and ensure the separation of her finances, and another to her office requesting a leave of absence. She required time to mourn, to exhale, and to ascertain her identity in the wake of her decision to cease striving to be all things to all people. She gradually reclaimed fragments of herself over the course of the subsequent days. She canceled the automatic transfers she had established to assist Donany's family, closed their joint accounts, and reclaimed her savings. She arranged a brief vacation by the coast, during which she would stroll along the dunes, consume fresh produce, and listen to the ocean undisturbed. She enrolled in yoga, a practice she had always intended to pursue but had never found the time to do. She spent lengthy afternoons journaling in cafes, surrounded by strangers who did not know her as Donany's wife or Elizabeth's daughter-in-law, and swam lengths at the community pool, the water rinsing away years of resentment. She reconnected with old acquaintances who embraced her with open arms, and their conversations were characterized by genuineness and hilarity, as opposed to the transactional pleasantries of her in-laws. Moments of anguish were also present, but they were silent and unexpected. A couple was observed holding hands in the park. She once heard a song that Donany played for her. She stumbled upon a list of infant names that she had concealed in a drawer, names that she had once envisioned murmuring to a child she might have had with him. She occasionally wept, but her tears were no longer a result of helplessness. They were the tears of someone who was beginning to heal and was processing a lengthy voyage. Upon receiving a phone call from Donany several weeks later, she immediately recognized his number. She refrained from being influenced by the tightening of her heart. She responded with poise and dignity, and when he expressed the necessity of an apology, she permitted him to do so. He spoke with genuine contrition, acknowledging his myopia, dependence, and the fact that he had permitted his mother to control not only his life but also theirs. His speech was halting. In silence, Adelina listened. A portion of her desired to forgive and to believe in the possibility of change. However, the more mature and resilient portion of her recognized that it was too late. She said softly after he concluded, "Donany, I truly appreciate your words. However, I have since progressed. We have distinct desires. I hope you find tranquility, and I pray that you develop into the man you are intended to be."